Pasadena. A Sunday morning in October 2011. Mick Jagger was 4 stalls away when Ray Driscoll picked up the record and set it. Pressing flaw. Off-center stamper. Worth nothing. $2. The old man behind the table said nothing. He looked at the record. He'd kept it in a separate sleeve for 48 years. Away from the others. Never in the green notebook with the rest. Ray hadn't noticed that. Ray hadn't noticed a lot of things. He also hadn't opened the inner sleeve. Inside, in blue ink, 8 words. Faded but legible. Words only one person in the world had ever written. And that person was 4 stalls away, going through a box of old records. He hadn't heard any of this. He was about to find something he hadn't been looking for. And Ray Driscoll was about to walk away from the most important $2 conversation of his life. Mick had left his hotel on Colorado Boulevard before 7. He did this in cities when there was time. Got up early, walked, found somewhere like this. He wore the purple chiffon shirt he always traveled with. No jacket, no hat. Silver bracelets on one wrist. Silver skull ring on the right hand. Nobody at the Rose Bowl flea market at 8:30 on a Sunday morning was expecting to see Mick Jagger, and so nobody did. He was just another old man in a flea market, moving slowly, following his nose. He'd been doing exactly this since before most of the vendors at this market were born. He stopped at a record stand first. Sold 45s, bought 3 without negotiating. Moved on. At the next stand, he found a box marked Misk UK Pressings 1960s, hand-lettered on the cardboard side, and slowed down. He went through it the way he always went through boxes, methodically, label, date, condition. He'd done this in markets in London, Paris, Tokyo, Buenos Aires. Always the same box somewhere. Always something in it that nobody had. Thought to price correctly, he was halfway through when he heard the voice from 4 stalls, down, youngish, efficient. The voice of a man who had made the same calculation 1,000 times and was making it again now. He kept going through the box, but he tilted his head slightly. Listened. George Marsh had set up at 6 that morning. 78 years old. Retired postal worker. He'd carried 10 boxes from the trunk alone. His hip had been giving him trouble since last winter, but he hadn't mentioned it to anyone. Mary used to say he was the most stoic man she'd ever met. He'd taken it as a compliment. He was still not entirely sure she'd meant it as one. Mary Marsh had died 14 months earlier. Pancreatic cancer. 12 weeks from the diagnosis to the end. 12 weeks. George had worked 32 years on a postal route. He knew distances. He knew durations. 12 weeks was nothing. It was a season, a fraction of a route. He'd kept everything as she left it for almost a year. Her cardigan on the hook. Her reading glasses on the nightstand. Her records in the spare room. 742 of them. Catalogued in a green notebook she'd started in 1958. Everyone numbered. Title, label, condition, date acquired, a brief note. Mary had been a careful woman. Organized. She'd worked for 3 years as a typist at a London record company in the early 60s, and she'd brought that precision home with her and kept it her whole life. Then the furnace failed. The quote came in. The savings account said what it said. George drove to the Rose Bowl on a Friday to understand how the market worked. On Sunday, he came back with 10 boxes. He'd priced everything low. He wanted it done. He did not want to think about it. One record he hadn't been able to price at all. He'd taken it out of the green notebook catalog the night before. The only record without an entry. The only one she'd never catalogued. He'd found it at the back of the shelf, in a separate sleeve, a blue handkerchief folded around it. Not catalogued. Not numbered. Just kept. He'd put a $5 tag on it and set it on the table and not looked at it directly since. He'd heard Mary play it once. Only once. Late one night in 1987. He'd thought she was asleep and had come downstairs for water. The kitchen light was on, but she wasn't in the kitchen. He followed the sound to the sitting room. The door was half open. She was in the armchair with the record on the portable turntable she kept in the cupboard, and her eyes were closed and her hands were in her lap, and she was completely still. The music was low. He didn't know the record. He stood in the doorway for perhaps a minute. She didn't open her eyes. He went back upstairs, back to bed. He didn't mention it in the morning. Some things you see through a half-open door and understand are not yours to ask about. They had been married 23 years by then. He'd understood that. He still understood it. He understood it every day, and every day he wished he'd asked. He wished now he'd asked. He wished it every day. But wishing didn't help with the furnace. Ray Driscoll had been buying and reselling at Rose Bowl for 12 years. 49 years old. He knew what everything was worth. Not because he'd always known, because he'd learned. He'd started coming to the market after his wife, Linda, died 7 years ago. Came the first time because he needed somewhere to go on Saturday mornings. Found he had an eye for value. Started buying. Started selling. The money wasn't life-changing, but it was a reason to get up. He knew the matrix numbers. He knew the pressings. He knew what the dealers in Pomona were paying and what the buyers in Silver Lake would pay 3 weeks later and what the margin between them looked like. He didn't ask stories. In the beginning, he had. In the beginning, before he understood what the market really was, he'd asked. He'd wanted to know where everything came from. He'd stopped because every story was a loss. Someone had died. Something had ended. A house was being cleared out. A collection was breaking apart because the person who had built it was gone. He'd found it easier not to ask. Price was concrete. Price didn't change. Price was something you could hold on to. Price didn't make you sit in your car in a parking lot and not be able to start the engine. He picked up the record, checked the matrix, pulled a torch from his bag and looked at the stamper impression. Off-center. He'd seen it 100 times. The grove depth would be inconsistent through side 2. Not a collector piece. Not at these prices. Pressing flaw, he said. Off-center stamper. Won't play cleanly on anything decent. $2. Final. George looked at the record. My wife kept it separate, he said. She'd had it since before we were married. Sure, Ray said. He was already moving down the cloth. $2. Think about it. George picked up the record, turned it over, opened the inner sleeve. He'd done this twice before. Once the night she died in the hospital car park, sitting in his car for an hour before he could drive. Once last month, at the kitchen table. Both times he'd read the 8 words and closed the sleeve and put it back. He didn't know who'd written them. Mary had never said. The handwriting was a man's. He knew that much. He'd wondered over the years. He'd stopped wondering. Some questions you learn to carry without expecting an answer. He closed the sleeve, put it back on the cloth, left the $5 tag on it. He didn't want $2. He wasn't sure he wanted $5. He was starting to think he didn't want to sell it at all, which was a thought he couldn't afford to have. He looked at nothing in particular and waited. Do you know what it's like to hold something that belonged to someone you've lost and not be able to put it down? Not be able to put a price on it either? Tell us in the comments. And stay with us, because what Mick Jagger does in the next few minutes is the reason George Marsh drove home from Rose Bowl that morning with something he didn't expect to keep. Mick came to the stand. He'd heard enough of the conversation to be curious. Nothing dramatic, just enough. He stopped in front of the table, looked at the records on the cloth, then at the one with the blue handkerchief folded beside it. May I? He said. George gestured. Go ahead. Mick picked it up. 1963 pressing. He turned it, looked at the label, looked at the matrix. He held it differently than Ray had held it, not assessing it, reading it. Then he opened the inner sleeve. He stood very still, 8 words in blue ink. His handwriting, 48 years ago and still unmistakably his. For M, who brought the tea when no one else thought to. He remembered writing it. Not because he'd thought about it in the years since, because it had been a real moment. Late 1963, a session near Denmark Street running past midnight. Nothing working. A young woman from the front office came in with a tray of teas nobody had asked for. Didn't say anything. Set them down. Started to leave. He'd stopped her. Asked her name. She'd said Mary. He'd picked up a pen from the console and signed the record she had under her arm. 8 words in blue ink. She'd gone red. Thanked him. Left. He had never thought about it again. "Until now, where did your wife get this?" he said to George. George looked at him. A stranger, old, purple shirt, silver ring. "She worked in London," George said. "Early 60s. Before we met. She came home with a suitcase and that record inside it and never talked about it." He paused. "She played it once. I saw her. Late at night. She didn't know I'd got up." Mick held the record for a moment. Then he looked around the market. At the stand, 3 tables down where a man was selling vintage audio equipment. A portable Dansette record player on the table. The man was reading a newspaper. "Nobody was buying anything. Does that play?" Mick said, nodding toward it. The man at the audio stand looked up. "Plays anything," he said. $20. Mick looked at George. George looked at the record. "Once more," Mick said quietly. "And then you take it home." George nodded. Just once, they walked 3 tables down. The audio vendor set the Dansette on a crate. Mick put the record on the turntable. Adjusted the stylus. The pressing was off-center. Ray Driscoll had been right about that. But the music still came out. Imperfect. Warm. The sound that came from that record, that particular pressing, that particular morning at a flea market in Pasadena, was not a clean audiophile experience. It was something else. It was the sound of a room in London in 1963 with the session running late and nobody happy, and then a door opening and a tray being set down and everything briefly. Slightly being okay, people slowed down. The way they always did, not suddenly, not dramatically. One woman with a shopping bag. Then a man at the plant stand next door looking up from his phone. Then 2 more behind them. The music wasn't loud, but it was there. Real. Coming from a portable record player on a wooden crate in the Rose Bowl Flea Market at 9:15 on a Sunday morning. A young man 3 tables away looked at the record, then at the man who had put it on, then at his ring, then at his face. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "That's," he started. The man next to him turned, looked. The name moved through. The nearby stalls the way names move through. Rooms when people aren't sure yet, and then are sure. Ray Driscoll. Heard it 2 stalls away. He lowered the record he was holding. He set it carefully on the table beside him. He looked at the man standing beside the Dansette. He went through what he always went through when his brain was refusing to accept a piece of information. Then the information won. He looked at the record on the turntable. He looked at the $5 tag still lying on the cloth at George's empty stand. $2 was what he'd offered. $2 for the only record in the market that morning that had 8 words of handwriting on the inner sleeve. The record ended. The needle lifted. The market went back to being a market. George stood beside the Dansette. He reached over and took the record off the turntable. He held it against his chest with both hands. "It's not for sale," he said, to no one in particular. To the record, to Mary, to 48 years of an unanswered question that had just been answered in a flea market in Pasadena. "I don't know why I brought it. I'm taking it home." Mick looked at him. "Good," he said. He walked over to where Ray was standing. Ray still had the record in his hands, the one he'd been holding when he'd heard the name. He set it down on the nearest table when he saw Mick approaching. Mick stopped in front of him. "You know what everything's worth," he said. "No edge, no anger, just a statement. That's a real skill. The market needs people who know that." He paused. "Before you price something, ask where it came from. One question. It doesn't cost anything, but sometimes it changes what you're holding." Ray looked at the $5 tag on the cloth where George had been standing. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. He just looked at it for a while. George drove home at 11. He put the record back in the blue handkerchief, carried it inside, sat at the kitchen table, opened the green notebook, found the blank space where entry 743 should have been. He wrote it in. Everything. Title, label, matrix number, condition. In the note column he wrote, "London, 1963, a late night. Someone brought tea." He closed the notebook, put it back on the shelf. Then he went and got the Dansette from the car. He'd bought it from the audio vendor on his way out. $40. The man had thrown in the case. He set it up in the sitting room, put the record on, sat in Mary's chair, listened to the whole side. He did this every Sunday after that. We'll leave you with something Mick Jagger once said. From a stage or a quiet room or somewhere in between, people have such a need to tell their story. And it's a basic human need. If this story reminded you that the best things in any flea market aren't on the price tags, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Another Legends story is waiting. See you in the next one.